So first of all, huge thanks to Nick and the team for inviting me here tonight. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you all about the Carbon Literacy Project. It's a relatively straightforward presentation. It's the what, whys, hows and whos of what we've been doing with carbon literacy. And I need to make it clear from the get-go that Manchester Metropolitan is not the only organisation delivering carbon literacy training. Many organisations are doing this and doing a great job. So there's a lot more experience other than ours out there. However, I am going to give you a background to the Carbon Literacy Project in the whole. Then I'm going to focus in on carbon literacy at Manchester Met. I'm also going to talk about the training that we have delivered to Manchester City Council, which we've been doing since 2013-14, because I think that's particularly relevant to this audience. And then I'm going to just say a very little bit about challenges and opportunities before we hand over to the panel for their questions, because I suspect they're going to revolve around those things. So Manchester, why the Carbon Literacy Project? Well, the industrial north is now pretty much uniformly striving to do its fair share and become zero carbon. You see these huge aspirational targets across the board, which is fantastic. But is anyone actually really recognising the scale of the challenge and what that truly involves? Because it is not small changes in any way, shape or form. Now Manchester, I think, I'm going to say here, by the way, I'm Sheffield born and bred, okay, because I know there can be a little bit of rivalry between the cities, but Sheffield born and bred, can trace my roots a good few generations back here, but I have become a little bit pro-Manchester in recent years. So Manchester, when it developed its first climate change action plan, actually took quite a novel approach. I'm not aware of any other cities who maybe did this as well, in that they brought a very large consortium of stakeholders together across the city in order to develop Manchester a certain future. That's since been revised in the Manchester Climate Change Strategy and then updated again in 2018 with the Playing Our Full Part, which was when Manchester adopted the zero carbon by 2038 in response to a Tyndall Centre report, and you have likewise done the same thing. But from the get-go, with Manchester a Certain Future, which was first published in 2009, there was a double headline. Headline number one was aiming for this 41% reduction by 2020, but headline number two was developing a low-carbon culture. So it was a double headline target for the city, and it was this recognition right at the very beginning that the emissions reductions that we need in order to prevent dangerous climate change are very challenging. And they are very challenging technologically, politically, and culturally. So understanding the scale of that and being willing not only to take positive action yourselves, but to politically support action, to give a mandate to your politicians to do things, was critically important. And therefore, they thought that embedding low carbon thinking into the lifestyles of the city was critically important. And that's where the Carbon Literacy Project came from. So in terms of who and what the Carbon Literacy Project is, in structural terms, there's Cooler Projects, who are a community interest company. They led the sort of stakeholder coalition in developing this approach around carbon literacy training. But once it had been developed, all the IP was given to a new charity that was set up, which is the Carbon Literacy Trust. So ownership of the Carbon Literacy Project sits with the Carbon Literacy Trust, and Cooler Projects is a community interest company, run it on a day-to-day basis. The way it actually, well, what is it? What do they mean by carbon literacy? This is the working definition. It's trying to ensure everyone has an awareness of the carbon costs and impacts of their everyday activities, the ability and motivation to reduce emissions on an individual, community and organisational basis. So we know what the problem is, we want to do something about it, we're going to do something about it. Not just by ourselves, we're going to become change agents and try and bring everyone else along with us. Now, the project itself was recognised at COP21, so that was the Paris conference where the Paris Agreement was open for signature, as one of the top 100 transformative action projects in the world. So it's sort of been viewed by the UN as having some legs to it. What the Carbon Literacy Project doesn't do is say, thou shalt deliver training like this. What it does is establishes a framework. So there is a standard, and that standard has these components to it. It must have a knowledge component, which is the basic climate change science and impacts, and the knowledge providing you with the ability to identify actions to reduce your emissions. It must embed some core values, and that's an understanding of equity and fairness. It must be aspirational, not negative, so trying to build a positive vision of the future, looking at all the co-benefits of creating a zero carbon world. It's got to motivate us as individuals, so build our individual agency, and it has to promote working with others. In the training, in order to gain your certificate and for your training to meet the requirements of the Carbon Literacy Standard, you must pledge to undertake an individual action and an action involving others. And if it's training offered in the workplace, those actions should be associated with your work. It must adopt local or social learning and group-based inquiry, because Sage on the Stage does not work to change people's minds and behaviours. They need to reach conclusions themselves. It has to be directly relevant to them and immediate, not distant, and not something that you can just sit in a room and absorb by osmosis. It's got to be something that you actively engage in yourselves. And it needs to be equivalent to a day's worth of learning. So, 7-8 hours of learning. That 1 day's worth of training can be delivered in whatever format you want. So you might do a whole day workshop, you might do e-learning and a workshop, and there is an e-learning module. That means you can do a half-day workshop alongside that. A lot of the training that we deliver, we actually do with a film screening and panel discussion, followed by a workshop. Or you could do multiple short sessions. So we've embedded it in units, and it's sort of sat in lectures and seminars. This is used a lot in things like toolbox talks, in professional services, estates, and so on. So there's lots and lots of different ways that you can approach delivering that day's worth of learning, including homework and sort of self-study activities, as long as there is a group inquiry element to it. In order to drive organisational change, there's also a bunch of organisational standards. So you can be a bronze, silver, gold, or platinum carbon literate organisation. It's very easy entry. You've registered a training course and a senior manager has completed that training. That's one rung down from your chief exec. So it has to be someone pretty senior. Carbon literate, so we're there at the minute. We're a bronze organisation. Carbon literate organisation silver, all of a sudden, if you're a large organisation, you have to have 15% of your workforce trained in carbon literacy. Well, we have 7,000 roughly employees, 6,000, 7,000. So that's actually becomes quite a challenge, meeting 15%. Yeah. You also need to have incorporated carbon literacy into performance management. So it needs to be sitting in people's PDRs. People need to have responsibility for carbon management and carbon literacy. You need to positively promote your status and provide a one-page case study to go up to gold. Over half of your workforce needs to be trained in carbon literacy, and you need to be positively engaging in advocacy, collaboration, and sponsorship of other people doing the training. And for platinum, more than 80% and even more evidence of advocacy, collaboration, and sponsorship. In terms of challenge, we're doing plenty of this, and it's hitting these numbers on workforce training that's actually really, really difficult. Engagement to date with the Carbon Literacy Project as a whole, so not Manchester Met, the project as a whole, there's around 11,000 people who've been certified in carbon literacy. There's 54 certified trainers. Everyone has to pledge to action, so there's 22,000 pledges there. There's 31 carbon literate organisations. It's now spread to 10 different countries, and there's starting to be an increase in the number of sector consortia that are being built up. So the first one that was established and has been hugely successful has been with social housing providers, because there's a lot of co-benefits in terms of bringing down energy consumption, for example, in social housing. The 5 to 15% carbon savings per person is based on standard sort of savings that you tend to see with behavioural change programs. For me, I would say the biggest benefit of the carbon literacy training is it encourages this across every work function. The stop and think before you do, yeah? Because the training is focused on what you do and your job and how climate change is relevant to that, what's going to happen to it in the future and what you can do in that role. It really, really helps here. So carbon literacy at Manchester Met. I've already said we are a bronze carbon literate organisation, even though we've been actively doing this since it started in 2012. Our science and engineering faculty Pro VC is the senior level manager who has completed the training, and he acts as our internal champion. My department, which is the Department of Natural Sciences, our head of department, has also completed the training and also acts as an internal champion. And we're a carbon literacy training organisation. We've got a team of 3, so I've got a senior research assistant and research assistant who are dedicated carbon literacy members of staff. And we have now trained over 1,000 of our students, over 1,000 external people. Externally, we've trained 32 of our students to be trainers. We've trained 56 people externally to be trainers. And if you add on all the people that they've trained, that's about another 4,000. So what are we doing? How did we get there? How did we make the business case? How have I ended up employing people in carbon literacy? Well, this is just using the EAUC's framework around a living lab to sort of explain that, just looking at the relationships between the academic staff, environment teams, our professional services, our institutional partners with city stakeholders, so that's the council, Cooler Projects, Carbon Literacy Project, and our students. So starting at the very, very beginning, it was a strong collaboration between our environment team and our academics in the Department of Natural Sciences. And we actually co-ran a PhD, co-funded an internal PhD, looking at this conflict that most of the higher education sector has blinkers onto. And that's the conflict between increasing internationalization and the carbon management or sustainability agendas. So they are two massive agendas for higher education, and they can interact in a really positive way. So internationalization and sustainability, we get this nice positive overlap in the area of global citizenship. The more we know and understand about each other's culture, probably the bigger our bucket of care, yes? But there is also this very negative interaction, which is our air travel emissions. Now, we've focused in here on student air travel emissions, but obviously staff travel emissions are also a very significant part of the puzzle. So we had a PhD student looking at this conflict, and this is, take a little bit of explanation, but it's looking out to 2020-21. This work was done back in 2013-14. So here we're looking at greenhouse gas reduction in both the higher education sector and aviation increasing in this direction, and growth in international student and study abroad numbers increasing in that direction. The medium growth is the medium growth in international student numbers according to government projections, and that's about where we've ended up sitting. The aspirational is if all universities in the UK met the sector reduction target, whereas actually we're on track for achieving only about half of it, okay? So we're looking at realistic medium growth. The dashed line is the footprint in 2013-14, and the solid squares is the footprint in 2021 when you take into account the aviation. And we completely use up any benefit in reducing our estates emissions by the increase in flights. Okay? If you go here and we have high growth in international student numbers, we more than wipe it out. Our footprint's gone up. Well, we're all patting ourselves on the back going, haven't we done well in reducing our carbon footprint? This is something we really can't ignore as a sector. For Manchester Met, compared to the sector as a whole, we have really low international student numbers, but because of that, we've got a strong institutional focus on increasing them in order to secure income, particularly with the challenges and so on of, maybe a freeze or a reduction in fees. So this is a big problem. We managed, took about 2 years, but we managed to get a business case through to ring-fence funds to support environmental education at the university. So we have to follow this flowchart in 2 directions. First of all, every single student who comes to Manchester Met has to complete a travel survey at point of registration where they tell us where they've travelled from and how in order to get to the university. So we can take account of that home time address to term time travel. We then calculate the carbon footprint of that. We then apply a carbon price to that carbon footprint, and we have been using the CRC EES, so the Carbon Reduction Commitment Energy Efficiency Scheme, carbon prices. That's now come to an end, so we're going to have to find a different carbon price to apply there. So that's how we go, this is how much money we need you to ring fence. At the same time, we've got quite challenging emission reduction targets in the university anyway, and the environment team has to meet those and then exceed them so that it has to be additional. So they then add on an additional target where they're making financial savings from the energy equivalent to this amount, and if they manage to make that, we can ring fence it and we can spend it on environmental education within the university rather than it just getting sucked back into university budgets. So that has been a key internal funding mechanism for us. Simultaneously, we developed commercial income stream from delivery of carbon literacy to external organisations. So we got our first contract with Manchester City Council. And in combination, having the internal pot of money and going, look at the external money we can bring in, that allowed us to write the business case that employed our first carbon literacy research assistant. It's just research assistant because we're a university. They're actually sort of knowledge exchange and outreach. And that was the first ever carbon literacy dedicated member of staff anywhere in the world, apparently. Once we had that staff resource, that meant we could develop our carbon literacy for students, our class programme, and an associated train-the-trainer programme, which I'll come back to later. And it increased our capacity to deliver external training. So that meant we could continue to grow our internal and our external activities. We could also start demonstrating benefits for the students and the university. And we've now got 2 dedicated members of staff, and we're linking students to the wider city through our outreach activities and increasingly through our commercial work as well. So we're starting to ask anyone who wants us to come and deliver training, can we bring our students along so that it's a great experience for them too. So in terms of how we grew, 2012-14 we were doing ad hoc delivery and it was just interested champions, members of staff. 2014-15 we appointed our first focus solely on carbon literacy member of staff, and we designed our internal student training. The following year we redesigned that and we added on our train the trainer, and we had our first train the trainer cohort, which was only extracurricular. In 2016-17 we did our second train the trainer, and we started embedding our standard carbon literacy training into programs. It went into 2 undergraduate programs in that year. In 2017-18 we did another train the trainer, and the workshop was embedded in 3 programs. Last year, we did both extracurricular and embedded train the trainer programs, And the standard workshop was in 5 programs, and that's when we appointed our second member of staff, and we also piloted schools outreach. So we started working with our widening participation team, and we're now taking our student trainers out into schools in Manchester. This year, we'll be running 3 lots of the Train the Trainer programme. It's embedded for second-year undergraduates now in our department, and it's accessible to every student in the university in the 3rd term. So that's any level of study and any discipline. We've redesigned our standard workshop, and it's now open to staff, and all our student trainers are quite happy to deliver to staff. It's embedded in 9 undergraduate programs so far this year. So that is geography, biology, chemistry, environmental science, engineering, business, sociology, nutrition, and events management. And we've only just put the call out for people who want support. So that's just from champions and people wanting it, rather than a sort of direct marketing. We are in the process of developing training for professional services. We got the go-ahead yesterday to deliver training to our university leadership forum. So that's everyone at departmental head level and above across academic and professional services. And we're looking to establish a social enterprise to link our student trainers to the wider Greater Manchester and carbon literacy community, because there's a lot of community groups and schools and so on who can't afford to pay for training. So what does our training look like? We wanted to design it so a student from any discipline in the university could feel confident picking it up and delivering it. So we use a film screening to cover the climate change knowledge part of it. When we first started doing that, we used the Leonardo DiCaprio film Before the Flood. That's actually already dated in terms of the science in it. So wonderful documentary that came out last year with David. Climate Change, the Facts. It's 1 hour, it's really hard-hitting, and the storyline is, the sort of story arc is exactly the story arc of carbon literacy. And we marry that up with an interactive workshop, and we tend to do a 2-hour session and a 4-hour session. So we top and tail that with some discussion and a few sort of quiz questions and so on, and then we do a 4-hour workshop. Right early on, as you saw from my timeline, we decided that we were going to invest our time in developing a cascade training model. Because in the same amount of time a member of staff could train that many students, we could, which is 100 students, which would be 5 workshops with 20 students in each one. We could instead spend those 5 workshops training 10 student trainers, and that's how many they could train. And allowing for students graduating and some people doing the Train the Trainer program and then disappearing and so on, we reckon it increases our delivery capacity by a factor of 3 to 4 to spend our time training the students and then they train the other students. It's really improved our project viability and scope, and even better, it's enhanced our student employability, and it's demonstrated huge amounts of added value internally. I should say we do pay them. So we've got a student employment agency, Jobs for Students, and they get paid at well above the minimum wage, much more than they'd get paid in any part-time job in Manchester through the Environmental Education Fund. So that's paying for certification and for our students' time. Our trainers, qualified student trainers, were the first trainers in the world. And here's some of the outcomes of the training. So we've done pre and post surveys before every training course we've ever delivered. This is just the ones to our students, so this is matched pairs. So pre-training in yellow, post-training in green, nice and simple, how confident, with 1 not at all to 5 very, or levels of knowledge and so on. So how much do you think you know about climate change? The 74% increase there, that's from matched pairs. 74% of respondents reported an increase in how much they thought they knew about climate change. So it is self-assessed. How confident do you feel about identifying actions to reduce your emissions? 83% increase. How confident do they feel about identifying the carbon impact of their future job role? 84%. How confident do they feel talking to friends and family? 73%. How likely? An increase of 59%, but they were already quite likely to be talking about it. And how confident do you feel talking about your views and actions on climate change in a job interview? A 70% increase there. Now, we have statistically analysed this data, and we've probably had about a third of the training delivered by staff and about 2/3 of the training delivered by students, and there is no difference in outcomes or perception of quality, engagement, informativeness, that's not a word, is it, on whether it's staff or student. So our student trainers are doing just as good a job as our staff trainers. This is from focus group discussions with our student trainers in terms of the benefits that they see in the programme, and it falls into sort of two broad areas: increased knowledge in action and then their employability skills. So the knowledge in action, they said that they got the basic understanding from doing the carbon literacy training, but it was the softer skills. It was the knowledge about how to motivate others to change their behaviour. The cultural skills is how one of them described it, that they felt they developed in the Train the Trainer programme. They also emphasised that they were more likely to take action themselves to reduce their carbon footprint because they felt they had to have authenticity when running a training course. So they were much more motivated to take action themselves if they were going to go on to train. And all of these sort of lead into increased confidence at the top and enhanced communication skills at the bottom, because the other thing that they found was they're much more likely to challenge and intervene. So if they saw poor behaviours, an example one of them actually gave was seeing someone putting something recyclable in the general waste bin in the canteen, they'd no longer sit there and just let it pass. They'd actually challenge those behaviours and point out how easy it was to actually put it in the right bin. On the employability side, part of me found some of this weirdly upsetting and distressing as a lecturer, that you think, hold on, the thing we're offering you extracurricular, you're actually viewing as much more valuable than your entire degree and everything that we strive to include in that. But the things that they identified: very much enhanced teamwork skills. We never put our student trainers to deliver by themselves. They're always in pairs, so they're always working in a team. Enhanced leadership skills there as well. But it was these things. It was an enhanced CV, getting direct interest from potential employers, so direct approaches on LinkedIn because they can say they're a qualified trainer and they've got experience and so on. Something to talk about in a job interview, and weirdly, brave enough to apply for a job because they've got that experience to put on their CV. So that was all, fantastic. Some quotes here. Becoming a carbon literacy trainer has been one of the most rewarding experiences during my time at Manchester Metropolitan. Well, thank you. Needless to say, we are quite pleased and quite proud of them. Our trainers are also very much extending their reach. So we've taken a couple of our student trainers over to Toulouse, and they have delivered carbon literacy training at a Grande École there. One of our trainers gave one of the provocations at the first mayoral Green Summit in Greater Manchester. One of them has developed and delivered training for the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. A whole group of them have developed a lab-based carbon literacy for University of Manchester. And one of them is on the Manchester Climate Change Youth Board now. So it's having that effect of creating that agency. In terms of what we have done for Manchester City Council, a little bit of background. Manchester City Council started initially rolling training out with their own employees. So they got their green champions and they started rolling training out. But they were finding resistance from people in the room, quite a lot of pushback when people were told you're going on this training. And they thought that might be easier to handle with an external delivery partner. So we first, as I said, delivered for them back in 2014. This was the refresh just last year in 2018, aligned with their new strategy. And we've now gone full circle in that we've now trained internal people at the council again to deliver this training, and that's what they're now doing. So this is the original, as in the original 28 training we were doing before the flood, because it was before David had brought his nice documentary out. We look at equity and fairness by looking at both carbon footprints and vulnerability to climate change around the world. A little bit around which greenhouse gases come from what, looking at the average consumption footprint of the UK citizen, carbon footprint of everyday things, a visioning exercise around what a zero carbon world would look like, then look at how taking action on climate change can address Manchester's challenges. So that's looking at links between the identified social challenges for Manchester, how they'd interact with the major climate change risks for the UK, identified in the UK climate change risk assessment, and then aligning that with the Manchester strategy objectives and looking at the interaction between all of those. We pretty much do the spheres of influence activity with absolutely any training that we do, which is thinking beyond just what can I do here at my desk to what can I do out here in the world. And this is particularly important with like the cultural sector, for example. First time I was doing a train the trainer with a museums group, and they're all talking about how they can reduce their energy consumption inside the museum. And likewise with theatres, you know, talking about, oh, this light and that. And it's like, hold on a minute, you've got an audience. You've got a whole group of people coming through. One of the most significant things you can do is communication and outreach. And they've really run with that. If anyone's in the cultural sector in the room, there's some fantastic examples of best practice coming from various consortia. We then look at carbon reduction in sort of key areas of activity. We actually go through a mini sort of starts trying to get towards an action plan there and then in the room. So looking at an ease effect matrix to prioritize those actions, start thinking through the barriers, putting some dates against when you're actually going to do something. Then we look at communication. So this is addressing things like value action gaps, being very, very careful with every little helps. If everyone does a little, we achieve a little. It's got to be the first step of a longer journey. So it's looking at those issues. What we then did with Manchester City Council, and this has only been piloted earlier this year, in May and June this year, there's a colleague of mine who was involved in a 2-year project which was actually looking at green space in Manchester and the contribution that domestic gardens make to green space, and discovered that all the assumptions in the climate models were completely wrong, because it assumed all private gardens were green space and actually they were less than 50% green. So with urban heat island effects, with the impacts that we're already seeing in Manchester, we actually thought, even though the main focus of carbon literacy is mitigation, that it would be entirely appropriate to start building adaptation actions into the training. So by switching out Leonardo for David, you gain half an hour, and we put in a half-hour Lego climate gardening activity, which went down a treat. It turns out you're never too old for Lego. And that's actually turned into a really great outreach activity as well. It's another one that's really good for engaging with schools and sort of museum events and so on. So with the council training, same deal, pre-training in the green, this time post-training in the pink, self-reported climate change knowledge, confidence identifying actions in their personal lives and confidence identifying actions at work. This is confidence in communicating with friends and family, with other staff at the council, and then with customers and the public, and then likelihood of communicating in terms of frequency of communicating, whether or not there's an increase with friends and family, staff, and customers and the public. So for me, we're seeing across the board these sorts of increases in, and yes, it's self-reported, and yes, it's straight after the training, but nonetheless, it looks like it is having an effect. For the Lego climate gardening, we got some great feedback, and actually this was one where there was an information deficit. Like, people did not know the importance of green space in terms of mitigating climate risk. We asked the question, would you recommend this training to others? This is not preaching to the converted. This is people who've been told they're coming on the training, and 100% of people said that they would recommend it to others. And then in a have you got any other comments box, 5% of people voluntarily said it should be made mandatory for all staff at the council. So opportunities, something that you may or may not be aware of is there is currently a BEIS-funded project that's being led by the Carbon Literacy Project to develop public sector carbon literacy toolkits. It's looking at central and local government, the NHS, all the blue light services and FE and HE. It's bringing together a wealth of experience. No one is precious who's working in this area. Everyone's making their materials freely available. It's all being collated and will be up on the Carbon Literacy Project websites. The writing groups are meeting right now. You can join if you want to. Just contact Cooler Projects or let me know and I'll pass your contact details on to them. There's going to be delivery of pilot training this calendar year. The pressure's on. They want us to do it before Christmas and then review and roll out in 2020. I said when I started that we're not the only really active sort of group. The cultural sector has got some fantastic case studies. So the Manchester Arts Sustainability Team, Museum Development Northwest, Cumbria Museum Consortium, Home Cinema, they're all doing loads and loads of stuff. Social housing providers, and in particular Great Places, who I believe also operate in Sheffield. They're doing some amazing, amazing things. And then I don't know if there's anyone in here from sort of a business school, but the Prime Network and Nottingham Trent University are really leading the charge. And they've developed carbon literacy training specifically for the Prime Network and business schools. And they're developing modules for, you know, accountants and so on and so forth. So subject-specific modules as well. So there is a lot going on. In terms of challenges, in my view, climate literacy, call it what you will, the name doesn't matter, is an effective mechanism for increasing knowledge and at least promised action on climate change. But the challenge is if we take all that positive spin off, is there's 11,000 people who are carbon literate and we've trained 1,000 of our students. Well, the population of Manchester is 500,000 and Greater Manchester is 2.5 million and we've got over 30,000 students. And we've been at it since 2012, yeah, and seriously since 2014-15. So there remains a major issue with delivery at scale if you genuinely want to get everyone. We're just starting to see a critical mass in terms of our capacity to deliver. Then you've got a recruitment problem. So if you want high levels of attendance and to not be preaching to the converted, you pretty much need to mandate attendance. So the only organisations we are aware of who have successfully trained every member of staff and progressed carbon literacy where, in my mind, it belongs, if we're serious about it being an emergency, and that's in induction, it's part of the things you must do as your job. The only organisations we know are ones who mandated it, who said everyone is doing this. And we are increasingly looking to embed to increase the numbers attending at the university. The third major challenge, I would say, is the perceived time cost. 1 day's worth of training. You're never going to get those people in a room for 1 day. They're far too important. The maximum you're going to get is an hour and a half or 2 hours. So you have to box clever in those circumstances. And we've just managed to do it with our leadership forum. The fixed time in the room is 2.5 hours. We are doing film screening before that with some great and the good on the panel to lure them all in, and then there is homework in that there will be an expectation, if they want to gain their certification, that they go away and take it to their teams and actually take action, like hold a carbon literacy meeting or invite us into a team away day. Major challenge 4 is it achieves absolutely nothing if there is no action taken as a result of it. And this is something sort of back from my carbon management days, I would say exactly the same thing in terms of carbon footprinting. People can get obsessed about the nitty-gritty and how accurate is that number in terms of the carbon emissions associated with it. Well, really, all you're doing is wasting a lot of time and money if what you care about is the number of people with a certificate or how accurate your measure of your carbon footprint is. This has to translate to action on the ground. So one of the things that I think is critical is actually having a framework in place so that people aren't turning up to yet another initiative and yet another training course where they're being asked to do loads of things and then that's it and there is no follow-up. So for me, having that framework in place where people can connect into a network inside their organization, where they can see concrete things happening, they're being updated on stuff and they've got an opportunity to get and stay involved is really, really important. Some very, very simple advice. I would advise working together. I would advise building and sharing capacity. I would work both top down and bottom up. And then you've got to work out actually how to deal with one of the major organizational barriers in any large organization, which is middle management. Don't reinvent the wheel, adapt it to suit. There's plenty of stuff out there. There's some great materials. We were just at one of the writing groups and we're seeing the stuff that Nottingham Trent have produced out of that Prime network. We're going to be changing our student training because in some of the activities their stuff's better than ours. It's just fantastic. It makes the hairs on the back of your arms stand up, and they're taking some of our bits. You know, sort of there's lots of tried and tested things around there. And yeah, if it's an emergency, then surely it's worth a day. Yeah. If we're going to say, if this is a climate emergency and we genuinely think that, then we need to behave as though it is. And that means making a commitment. And this is a good first step, but it is only a first step. And that's it from me. Thank you.